And I am apparently still live. Okay.
From the trenches of motorsports and Gearhead Central, this is RealTuners Radio, your all-motor, boosted, and nitrous-fed hour of power. Now, here's your hosts, the Reverends of RPM, the Faction of Traction, John Bewley, Scott Clark, Bill Fowler, Scott Evans, Mark Dahlquist, Mike Perduto, James Short, Tom Sewell, Brian Barnhill. This is RealTuners Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 134 of RealTuners Radio. It's Wednesday, September 9th, 2020, and we're just over 6 months into pandemic mode. Thanks again for tuning in. We know our listeners love to hear about chassis tuning. If you remember way back on the Justin Shearer episode, that's Big Chief, he said his go-to guy on this topic was Chris Bell at Kinetic Engineering. Well, tonight, our guest is none other than the man, Chris Bell himself. We'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll get to the questions. Other topics tonight. Shortly after assuring us that the rumors of financial difficulty were completely bogus, NHRA has decided to deeply cut the payouts in pro classes, as if pro stock paid more money than gas money to win anyhow. And now that everyone is wondering just what's going on out there in Pomona, this pandemic is affecting tracks, sanctioned bodies, and teams in different but generally bad ways. Anyhow, let's get this party started. No face masks required. This is RealTuners Radio.
All right. I can take my mask off?
You can take your mask off. No mask required. Hey, and the thing hasn't seized up yet on us. We're doing pretty good, man. It's still got all the rods in the block on the RealTuners Radio server here. Trying to avoid audio and video glitches like last time. But good work over there. Producer Jason is doing a good job tonight. So Perduto, what's going on down in Orlando, man?
Not much. Watching rain fall from the sky. Ozzy finally gave us the top end race we've always been wanting, allowing us to race in the big end of Orlando, and we got 2 rounds in, a round and a half in, and it rained. And then I was actually supposed to be at the track tonight, but guess what? It rained. And, we are going to finish up that turbo test I started on 2 weeks ago. Right. We finished that tomorrow night. We have pushed the VS charger, I think, as far as it's going to go. And tomorrow night it's going to get swapped out with an FI charger. And we're going to see side by side what the difference really is between the VS and the FI unit. So we'll find that out tomorrow.
That's cool. I mean, and considering the cost factor of those two things, that's going to be an interesting shootout. You're a good guy to have do that test. You're just basically going to report what you see, right?
And that's all I'm doing. I'm literally, this is the data. Do with it what you want. I told him I'm declaring no winner, and we'll go from there. Whoever wins, wins. That's what's going to be.
Lovely. That's awesome. Well, we should go ahead and get to our guest tonight. So this is really cool. If you listen to the Justin Shearer episode, you heard him talk a couple times about, man, I really like to talk to Chris Bell about these kind of things. But I ran into Chris's cousin out here in Southwest Missouri, and he's like, hey, man, we'll talk to Chris. We'll see if we can get him on here, if we can get some time. So thankful for this guy to spend some time with us, because you're right in the middle of, technically busy season, plus it's a year that's all topsy-turvy. So anyway, big round of applause for Mr. Chris Bell from Kinetic Engineering. Chris, how's it going, man?
It's going great, man. I appreciate you guys having me on here.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate having you here. Believe me, we're the lucky ones here. I guess generally we'd like to kind of let you introduce yourself and kind of give your background, how you got started. Feel free to take all the time you like. How you got started and how what you're doing today. Take us kind of the same history you gave me as an intro before we started here. Kind of get the guys and listeners up to speed.
Chris,
fire away with questions.
Real quick before you get started, I want to give a shout out. There's a guy there, Justin Sherman, just posted all the way from I'm going to butcher this, Al Udeid Air Force Base out in Qatar. So he's listening all the way out there. Thank you for your service, sir, and thank you for listening all the way on the other side of the world.
Justin. That is awesome.
Absolutely, that's cool. I spent a lot of time in Qatar. We raced over there with the Arabian Drag Racing League. Been in Qatar, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, all the Middle East countries. Pretty cool over there. It's a different world. Just to kind of introduce myself, Chris Bell, Kinetic Engineering. I kind of started my career, like every one of us, 10 years old, sneaking Hot Rod Magazine into science class, and then getting busted for it. And then by the time I was 15, I started building my first race car. I was about 24, and I worked at a company called Ace Manufacturing, and we manufactured truck clutches and got them, helped them get started into motorsports, and then ran the motorsports division of that till about 2002. And then I started crew chief for an NHRA Pro Stock car for Terry Adams, and partner car Terry Adams and Barry Grant. That's a name for the archives. But then went through that for a while, was gone too much, decided to go IHRA racing with Robert Patrick and crew chief Robert Patrick's car for a few years. And then went to Dean and Kerry Goforth, crew chief their cars in IHRA Mountain Motor Stuff for a few years and won some championships there. Then I decided to take a couple years, and Tim McCamus asked me to be the tech director for ADRL when he took it over. Did that for a couple years, and then started Kinetic at that time, and just started doing shocks for whatever car I was working on personally. And then it kind of evolved into, hey, can you build me a set? Hey, can you build me a set? Can you build me a set? And blew up into a business on accident. After that, I went to work with Bob Ram, crew chief in his NHRA Nitrous Pro Mod car, and still currently do that. And kind of in a little bit of a downside here because of all the COVID stuff, but we'll be back later this year or next year for sure. We offer chassis tuning advice, shocks. We do shock struts for every type of vehicle pretty well on the planet. Street cars, grudge stuff, no prep stuff, street race stuff, up to the highest level of whatever NHRA or outlaw.
So people can not only buy products from you, and they can also get advice all the way on up to professional services on site then.
Absolutely. And we offer, we have multiple different, like just dynos here. We have 4 different shock dynos here that all dyno in a different fashion. They have crankshaft dynos, hydraulic dynos, electric dynos, and they all have their specific needs. So there's times that we'll develop something on one dyno and then put it into tire shake, like on the hydraulic dyno, where I can make my first move on it at my first 1,000th of an inch move at 100 inches a second. So we'll see whole different things, and we offer those services even to companies that not our product. We have companies that send us stuff, automotive stuff. We're doing some side-by-side stuff right now that they send us products and say, hey, help us evaluate it. Help us, use your experiences and look at it from a different angle.
That's amazing. So one of my questions was, how does a shock dyno work, and what's the point of a shock dyno?
It's basically force versus time. So there's a couple different types of shock dynos. One's a crankshaft dyno. It has a crankshaft and a Scotch yoke, and it just compresses the shock and extends the shock. There's a load cell on the other end of the shock. It's timed, and so we'll measure. We'll give it specific velocities and measure forces based on those velocities. What we'll look for then is different curves. We'll want specific numbers at specific velocities that the car sees, and then maybe we'll want to let's just say a typical drag car for the most part operates in 0 to 8 to 10 inches per second. The initial launch will be higher, for the first 3,000ths of a second. And then when they go over the bumps, they'll see higher velocities. But so the shock dyno, we can simulate that. I can even take on my dynamics dynos, my hydraulics, I can take a race pack run and put it into the software and duplicate what it saw on the race pack data. Then I can make it so I can take 2 runs I can make it the change that I made in the shock and see the actual effect versus the race pack data.
Okay. So when you when you play data back from race pack, I mean, I presume you're just exporting a CSV file or whatever, but you
Yep.
can import that. Now the race pack typically shows shock position, doesn't it? Or are you looking at velocities more?
We create a math channel for velocities on pretty well everything that we mess with, and so then we import both of those data. So it sees, so it duplicates the velocities, and up to 2 inches on that. On real high speed, I can do 2 inches, I can do 3 inches, and up to 50 inches a second. But so any movements 0 to 2 inches, then we can duplicate that velocity. And for the most part, that covers the majority of a run on shocks. The velocities are the biggest things because that's the fluid flow. That's the hydraulic side of it. And we'll see two different things. A shock typically is built on a low speed and a high speed circuit. Some shocks, you only have the ability to adjust a low speed or a high speed. Some shocks, you can adjust both. And basically what those are is, I tell a lot of people, instead of really calling them a low speed or a high speed, we'll call them a high velocity and a low velocity. The low speed side will typically be a needle and seat. So it can flow as much fluid through the needle and seat as it allows until it's exceeded the flow capacity of the needle and seat. Then it just backs the fluid up. And that's when it will switch to the high speed circuitry. And that's like the piston with the shim stack on it. Then the pressure, will back up and blow the shim stack open. It's a lot easier for people to understand if you think of that as when the volume got high enough to exceed the needle and seat, then the volume opens the shim stack.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Man, and actually that explanation just opened up a whole new world for me, because to me, it was like body and paint work, just fucking voodoo, man. I don't mess with it.
we always talk in, because everything I do is in velocity, but I try to explain to people, I really try to educate my customers and just people in general, more than sell them on something or hand it over to them. When I first started in shocks, we got everything. Everybody ran Coney Electrics that Don Ness built, and they were just voodoo. You bought them, you bolted them on, you had 4 settings that you could change, time-based, and that's it. And if anything weird happened, you sent them back to Don. He changed something in them, brought them back. I was fortunate to be very good friends with Don Ness. And I called Don one day and I'm like, hey, I can do anything on this car except the shocks and struts. I can go through the motor, the Linco, set up the chassis, anything. And he's like, well, come up here for a couple of days. And so I went up there for 3 days and brave enough to build my own set of shocks afterwards. And
Wow.
And Don was a very good teacher. And most people didn't know Don that well. Don was in his circle, he was outgoing, but other than that, he was very, stayed inside his circle. And
Understood.
And so Don taught me that, because I didn't understand it either. I didn't know how to read a dyno sheet. We all got these dyno sheets, and it was cool to compare them to your friends and see, oh, the line's bigger. It's different. We didn't know what it meant. Nobody knew what it meant. And for the most part today, I'll send them a dyno sheet and they'll be, what's this tell me? And I try to explain it to them, but for the most part, it's for our use more than the customers.
So what are the biggest parameters that you look at when, for example, we have a couple of listeners out here. Customer of mine, Larry Norman, said, I just put Kinetic double adjustable struts on my car. Chris told me where to start and I didn't have to touch it. What kind of things are you asking people, like when they say, hey, I'm going to buy a set of shocks or struts or whatever? What are the parameters you look at? I'm guessing unsprung weight's probably a big one.
The big things, and you'd be amazed at how many people don't know this about their car. Front and rear weight. So if like Larry calls me and says, hey, I need struts for my car. If he calls and somebody calls and says, I need shocks. Okay, these are the basic questions that I'm going to ask. Total weight of the car, front and rear weight of the car, power adder, transmission type, gear ratios, and the tire that you run, and what kind of surfaces you run on. One of the probably most important things out of all of that is what the surface that you run on. People don't always understand. They think, okay, if I buy this, it's going to work here, here, and here. We have different shocks that will work. We have guys that, just a real quick story. We had a guy that races, and he's got a grudge car. This thing, a screw-blown Impala, runs 360s. This guy races only at night, and he races on a prep track. And we have Coney aluminum shocks on it. And I tell this guy, look, as long as you're running in your controlled environment, it will be okay. If not, the more you spend on shocks, the bigger the window gets. And so he calls me one day, and he's like, man, we were testing, and this car won't move off the start line. It won't move. And I'm like, okay, well, if you go back tonight to test, call me, and we'll work on it while we're there. And he said, no, we're testing now. And he was in Florida. The track was 141 degrees, and the car would not move. I mean, it literally would not move. And I told him, I said, look, you're outside your window. We put a set of shocks that aren't as expensive as people think. It's expensive to some. It was $2,000 for a set of double adjustable. They were Penske.
That's not bad at all.
And this car runs 360s, daytime, nighttime, whatever, with 2 clicks of adjustment. One thing we pride ourselves in is we have over 500 builds that we use on shocks and struts. Most manufacturers have, and because they're a manufacturer, they're limited to having to keep 2 or 4 on the shelf, and that's it, of builds. We're lucky we have over 500. So when a guy like Larry calls me, he gives me the basics of his car, we build everything to the application. So I can build it specifically for him and put him in the middle of his adjustment so that he's going to have window both directions.
So that's your way of having parts on the shelf ready to go, but still be able to address their custom needs. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. So everything we do is built per the application. So we may have shocks that set here that we go ahead and build them up, and we make them what we call wet. So they won't even have a piston in them, but they'll already be vacuumed and, semi-assembled. And then we'll take that, we'll grab them, we'll take them apart, we'll put whatever piston we want on them, whatever build for that application. Saves us time and gets it out faster. But we don't keep anything pre-built on the shelf other than some street car stuff. We do like some Camaro, Mustang, daily driver type stuff we keep pre-built.
Got it.
All right, I got a couple questions coming off a couple of the stream requests. First off, what's the story with a monoshock?
Like on a dragster, a monoshock, it's put on there typically for space, price, and just basically to make the thing packaging. We're going to call it packaging. Okay. We build a lot of monoshocks for especially for Dan Page race cars on his dragsters. We run. He has dual shock cars and monoshock cars. The biggest difference that we run into when we have a monoshock versus a dual shock car is canister volume. So all the shocks we do are pressurized. They have a canister. And if we run, say, a 7500 series Penske, which has the canister made into the bottom of it, not external, the volume is too small for the amount of travel that would be required if we use that as a mono. So inside that canister, as the shock compresses, we see the pressure increase inside that canister. Therefore, it wants to shove the shock back apart. It's like putting spring rate in it. So when we go to a monoshock on a dragster, we have to go to a larger external canister. We've had a lot more success with a Penske 80 300 series or an Olin's the TTX series, which has a larger external canister. We don't see that pressure rise. It's as far as one being better than the other. We've got cars just as fast on both. It's a lot to do with the chassis builder.
All right. First of all, you mentioned that car that came to Florida and was having issues down here. As someone that lives 25 minutes from the track, being a local, we have a saying when we hear those guys that come down here with them high-dollar cars and they kick the car tires off on the starting line, it's welcome to the swamp, bitch. You get used to it down here. Yeah. So question personally, when do you start making the jump from standard set of shocks. When do we need to add canisters? What is the advantage of the canister? Why do we go to the canister? That's going to be something that why do we need to make that jump, and when do we need to make that jump?
Anytime I can run a pressurized shock, it's better. So they're typically, it's a monotube shock. Most of the non-pressurized shocks, and so that's some of the AFCOs, the Conies, some of the QA1s. Where you run into it is cavitation. So the higher the velocity gets in the shock, the more they're prone to cavitation. The more it's critical to have a pressurized shock. So if you're running a car that's, you've got this 990 car and your local bracket guy or whatever, the QA1s, the AFCOs, the Conies, they're fine. You're not going to see high velocities. You're not going to see, even like a leaf spring car, a leaf spring Caltrack type deal. They don't see velocities typically over, 4 or 5 inches a second. The higher, once you see velocities getting up into the 20s, so let's just take a pro mod car. When we let off the button, we'll see velocities up around 30 inches per second.
Okay.
So that means it travels 1 inch in 1/30th of a second, essentially. And so then that's where the pressurization comes in. What happens is a shock compresses. So if you take your hand and you were you being from Florida, you take a bucket of real wet sand.
Yep.
You shove your fist down in it, it displaces the sand. You pull your fist out real quick, there's an air void under your fist that then will get filled back in with sand. That's basically what cavitation is. That's the layman's terms of cavitation. So if you don't have a pressurized shock, it will pull the piston through the oil so fast that it create an air void on the backside. That's not as big of a deal until the shock turns around and then runs into the air instead of fluid. So with a pressurized shock, you have a separator piston. So you have the canister, basically it's an air reservoir. So there's a piston in there. The fluid, when it compresses, pushes that piston against the air pressure. And then whenever it extends, the air pressure pushes the fluid back into the piston, uses the piston, pushes it back into the shock and eliminates that. We'd like to see, any car, kind of my ballpark is if a guy runs 440s or 50s in the 8th, anything faster than that, I really want a pressurized shock on it. He's going to see velocities and track changes that will benefit from that.
That's a great way to put it. And I was just actually messaging on the back tire sounds guys. I was like, you're good at making it understandable to everyone because everyone's catching what you're saying, which I like a lot. We have a talk about the no prep stuff, and Daniel Lembo asked, and I'm going to be careful on this because there's two very different types of no prep. There's track based and those streets where we get 800 passes. Wade Rich says you're one of the best in his opinion, by the way. Hi, Wade.
Man, I love Wade.
What's up, Wade? He's been on here too. We love him.
I've known Wade since '94, since I started, and man, I love testing with Wade.
Yep.
There's no preps with prep street and the track style no prep, and then there's that bare road no prep. So
The real no prep.
Yeah, the straight up like the race we're doing now on the big end, like they're talking about, and there's some people listening that shouldn't know this yet, but they're going to hear it anyways. We're talking about every 20, 25 runs moving the starting line again. So like we're talking like we want true stoplight no prep. So how are you setting up a no prep? What do you see with no prep? What do you feel like is the correct start to this? Let's put it that way.
Or let me add to that. How do you approach the obvious variances? Because I've got customers that run a no prep Kings, and dude, they're putting down G's King. They're pulling G's that I only see at like NHRA prep on no prep King stuff. So I was just curious, how do you approach that difference along with Mike's question?
There's a lot of, you kind of preface that, but there's a lot of difference in no prep, what we're going to call no prep. We went to some of the no prep King races, and I've been there with several customers. And we were at Bristol a couple of years ago, and NHRA had been at Bristol. We'd been there 3 weeks prior to that. And when we got there to run, they scraped the track. Okay. But then we were allowed to test on it for 2 days. Yeah. And so what do we do when we went at let's just pick NHRA. When we get there, we scrape the track, and then we take and we put the rotator on it for a day. So all that really does is makes the track really good. Well, we had went 579 3 weeks prior with the Pro Mod car. The track was better when we were there for the No Prep Kings race than it was that I went 579 on.
Yes.
And so when you hear no prep, it's no prep for the first car, a little bit of prep for the second car, a little bit more for the next car.
Yes.
And by the time you're 20 cars in, man, you're not getting a radial track, but you're getting a Pro Mod style prep track. Because the best track is built with rubber, not even with glue other than for radial cars. But as far as for slick cars, if you can build the track and Wade might chime in on this, but if you can put a little bit of glue down and rotate the track, and use the rubber off those tires, it's the best surface that you'll run a slick car on. So we'll see that. And then we have the true no prep where we're picking totally virgin road. This thing has never seen a car on it other than the semi that went through 5 minutes ago.
That's how I like it.
It's dusty. It may be grooved. I've been on some, we're going to call it street race stuff, but I don't know, the prepared street race stuff.
Sure.
That we've been given virgin roads that were brush finish, and it will decimate tires. It turns tires just to dust, and it takes 20 cars to get anything down. So the biggest thing you do is, whenever I first started dealing with some of the guys like Justin, Street Outlaws, I went down there and everybody's like, you're a track guy and this is the road and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's just a junk racetrack. It's not a road. I've been on racetracks that are as bad as the streets that they race on. And so you just have to treat the car accordingly. The car will typically tell you what it wants if you will watch it. If the car, you're on that backwards race at Orlando and, you're on virgin asphalt down there and you let off the button and this thing just dusts the tires. Something has to stop the tire to create rotation in the car. So I don't care how loose you make the front end. I don't care what you do. If it doesn't start rotation, the front end can't work. So how do you fix that? Typically we throw a bunch of weight in the back of the car. Long 4-link, extend the 4-link out to get as much leverage as you can, and a bunch of weight in the back of the car. And that starts the rotation. Then that allows the front end to help you. Then, you'll watch the car, you'll make a run. Well, it goes out 100 feet and then it blows the tires off. Okay. Well, then maybe the bar's not long enough because now it doesn't have any leverage out there when the front end tried to set back down. Maybe we need to hold the front end up longer. Race crank center line. And you'll just watch all of those things as it progresses, and then you'll get a car pretty fast on. I'm amazed at how fast we can run on truly virgin surfaces. When I first started dealing with, especially like Justin and Sean Ellington and all those guys down in Oklahoma, 4 years ago, if they made a 5-second pass on the street, they were a hero. Now you better run 420s. Yeah. And it's crazy, but it's just physics. It's all just physics. And it's all just, the junkier the track gets, you have a bag of tools that you pick from, that being the weight, the length of the 4-link, crank center lines, anything to start rotation.
Yeah, we got a couple guys locally. I know one of the cars here, when he races at the, what's it called? When he races at this prep end of the track, he has a fiberglass trunk lid on. And when he races on the big end with us, that trunk lid weighs about 325 pounds. But I tell people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is our starting point. When we're starting on this, and you almost put a radial tune-up in a slick tire car to start on that true no prep. You want that anti-squat, you want the separation to kind of plant the tire to start us, and then work the car from there versus a true slick tire setup, which would be almost neutral and kind of tends to blow the tires off instantly when we let go of the button.
It depends on the surface and the tire. If you're running a small tire, you're running a 10.5 tire or something, we'll lean more towards the extension, smashing the tire into the ground, trying to keep the tire loaded. If we run a bigger tire, we're running on something that's got we got a 1734 on the car. we can't smash the tire as much because the tire tries to fold up in the middle.
Yeah.
So we'll compress the back of the car, but typically we'll compress the back of the car. Let's just pick a number and say it's 1 inch. And then we'll start levering the car back apart. So we'll start trying to get the car closer to ride height. So basically you'll take like a radial looking shock graph and just move it down 1 inch at the starting line. And because once you get the tire wrapped up and the sidewall controlled, you can start putting leverage back to the shock or to the tire. You can start pushing on that tire some more. It's very critical initially, though. A big tire like that, it tries to pivot off the sidewall. So if you smash it too hard, it just sucks the center up, and you end up with 2 little bitty 2-inch wide tires on each side of it.
All right, 2 things. One, I know Scott has a question that I'm super interested in. And second is Brian Barnhill just brought his newborn baby out, and we got the kid on the camera real fast. So
tell about her quick, Brian.
Let's say 7 days old, 8 days old?
We are at 11, 12, the 28th, whatever it's been since then.
So, almost ready for a junior.
Right?
Whatever we keep saying.
So,
Mike was obviously happy to be on camera.
Yeah, right. Drag racing puts her to sleep, but get on the road course stuff, and she's all.
Can I ask a
right
follow
now,
up on the car prep piece before we go to Scott's very important question?
Yes.
And that is, I think it bears repeating that if I understood everything you said, you're not going to have a car that is going to work great at a virgin surface and then take that car the next day and just change some shock settings and go down a prep track. Correct?
Correct. 100% correct. It's 2 different cars. And, the better the shocks are, the larger the operating window is, but it's still just a window, and every other thing about that car is working inside their windows. The shock's not going to fix it. We get people all the time, "Oh, I'm struggling with my car. I need a new set of shocks." I'm a horrible salesman because I probably talk 10 to 15% of the people out of buying shocks, just because they don't understand, and it's just what you said. Well, we were at the track last weekend, and there's a bunch of radial guys there, and this thing flew up and down the racetrack every time. We went Wednesday night, and it won't move. Well, it was all street cars there, and they dug holes in the starting line. Well, you've got to work on the car. You've got to change the car. You have to change the weight, the forelink, or the ladder bar location, or whatever you're working with as far as suspension. And you may have to loosen up the front. You may have to tighten up the front. There's a shock is just like forelink. There's no magic shock that fixes. And again, horrible salesman on my part. I should sell the magic shock. But
we have a magic shock, I promise.
There is no magic shock. There's no magic forelink. There's no magic tune-up in a car. It requires all of those things to make them happy. And that's where just experience, just time, and you lean on people that you buy products from for some of that experience until you get it.
That's good.
That actually comes up with something that I have a difficult time answering when some people ask. I would say, when do you say you do need a shock? Is it when you are getting so far out of the middle of your range, or what? Where's the line of when you say, hey, you just need to work on the car, versus your shocks are wrong?
If we get people all the time that we send a shock out preset and give them settings. And if they're running on different track surfaces, we'll give them different settings for that shock to work in. But I'll get times that a guy be like, look, man, I can't get the back of this car to compress. It won't compress on the starting line. Okay, we'll loosen the shocks up 4 clicks on compression just for a number. Okay, they come back, said, nope, didn't compress anymore whatsoever. I'm going to go 4 more. I'll typically tell them at that point, 4 more, you may as well go 10. Okay, all right, I'll go 8 then. They'll go 8, come back, same results. It's not the shock. There's something else in the car that's feeding that. Either it doesn't have leverage, something's bound up in the car. So typically, if you have a good shock builder, and I'm going to throw it out there to not just me, there's other people out there. If you have a guy that has experiences and sells you a package, a shock, and his shock should typically work closer to the middle of its build. If you end up all the way at one end, then you need to, talk with him again. If you're all the way at one end and the car's working, then send the shocks back and get the valving moved to put that back in the middle, just to line your window up again.
And that's strictly going to be like the management of velocity versus the force applied.
Yeah, and so you may have a car. We'll get guys again that they'll have a car and they say, "Oh, this thing won't compress." We put your shocks on and it won't compress. Well, why'd you buy my shocks? Well, because the last ones we had on it wouldn't compress. Okay, so it's a leverage issue, or a weight issue, or the surface, the tire that you're running on the surface, the weight, the crank center line, all of those things. And then we'll try to typically, I can't spend hours and hours on the phone with every customer, but we try to at least give them a direction. Okay, stretch the four-link out on this thing, put some weight in the back of it, raise the crank center line. Oh, and they'll call you back. Oh man, we stretched the four-link out 4 inches. This thing compresses an inch now and it compressed 0. Okay, well, you were on the edge of it. You were on the very edge of that car being happy. Now the shock starts working because it's given its window. I tell everybody a race car is a series of 12 by 12 windows, 10 of them in a row. And the shocks are 1, the four-links 1, the tune-ups 1, the gear ratio is 1. And if you slide each of them, if you take one, you slide it over 4 inches, and you slide one the other direction 4 inches, now you got this little bitty, 4-inch window you're looking through. They may all be lined up except one component, and you push that back, and now everything else works. There's a lot of times that we'll get guys put 34 links in the car. It's not the 4-link. It's not the, I've wore the holes out in this thing. I've had the shocks in every setting. And then you come back and the guy's like, we worked on the tune-up and fixed it. We changed the converter and it fixed it. All of that stuff has to operate in its window. And if I'm rambling, guys, just yell at me.
No, you're doing perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they'll be calling this a top 3 or top 5, at least so far. Maybe see if we can keep her going a little while.
Yeah,
I got some
reinforcing
questions.
things who people we've had on the show are focused on some of those other windows, and we hear from the top guys the same message about the other elements needing to be in place. So there's no magic torque converter, there's no magic tire, there's no magic whatever. The guys that are doing well, especially when they move from place to place, are the ones that learn how to adapt. That was one of the fun things about listening to Justin, was he talked about how he observed what was going on in a particular place and what to do to the car to do that. Mike asked the question about when to make that change to a shock with a canister and so forth. A lot of guys who listen to this program are, I'll call them on the way up guys. They're beginning to build a combination. Everybody can build big power now in ways that we never would have imagined a few years back. But they're working their way backwards through the chassis because they're doing a stock style suspension, a G-body, a Fox body Mustang, etc. When they're working on those combinations and they're beginning to develop a shock budget, do they spend it on the front first or the rear first if they have to make that choice?
We typically spend it on the back first, and then the front follows. So if you're going to spend it, you're going to see, if you've decided I'm going to buy a specific set of shocks for this application and struts, if you start at the back, then you will see the need for that will sell you on the fronts, because you'll see things to start changing. You'll see different, bite on different surfaces. You'll see your operating window, where maybe when it goes from day to night at the racetrack, you don't even have to adjust the shock. Again, it works off velocity. So it's a little bit like a carburetor. It will self-tune itself a little bit. And so I tell everybody to start with the rears. And I say everybody, 9 out of 10, if they start with the rears, and it's typically a budget thing, the guy will call me within 2 to 3 months and want fronts. And he'll be like, oh, wow, now I see that the fronts are hindering me. I see that the front's doing this because I couldn't see it before. We didn't get the back working. And we kind of, I guess a little bit on that. My company is typically known. A lot of people think that our stuff is crazy priced. They think that a set of shocks is $10,000. We have shocks that are up to $20,000 a pair.
Yep.
We have shocks that are $1,200 a pair. Everything in between. For, again, those guys that are running the $1,200 shocks, we got guys that, and I'm comfortable with them running, 14s and 20s on a $1,200 pair of rear shocks that are built specifically for their application. That's, every guy that's a budget guy, he spends that much on tires, torque converters, probably beer for the weekend for most of them.
Right?
Yeah.
No, it's just fuckers that won't pay $500 for a tune, but they got $3,000 and a set of wheels that they change their mind on every 4 weeks.
But what I tell a lot of people is just back up and just so go to the bank before you leave to race this weekend. Go to the bank and take out a number. I don't care what it is. Take $5,000 out of the bank, and then when you get home, see how much money you had left. Okay, so if you went down the track every run, it cost you the exact same amount of money to get home as if you didn't go down all weekend. So what pays better? What's better returns? Going up and down the racetrack. Be it that I don't care if you're a bracket car, but going up and down the racetrack pays better. It costs the same money no matter what. And people will be shocked that they'll go out to race and they'll come back and they spent $2,000. Easy to do.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
And then that guy be like, oh man, well, I could have bought shocks, and it went down 2 out of 6 times. So you think it would have went down? Well, it would have helped it considerably. And then the guy would be like, okay, well, I'll stay home for 2 weeks and I'll buy shocks. And because again, a lot of people think that our stuff is just because of we were known more for the pro mod stuff and the really higher end stuff. But it's not. If somebody's got a $1,200 budget, $1,500 for fronts. Larry right there that we just did fronts for him. I'm sure he'll tell you that the money he spent was worth it, and it wasn't a lot of money. It's not
right.
And you can,
in the grand scheme of things, it was way more value than struggling without the right parts.
Right. And just like talking about, just a second ago that, I was asking about these guys moving up. So start with the $1,200 shock, and then you'll run it and you'll change. It's just like motors. Like every guy that calls me, so especially we have guys that $1,200 shock, and I tell them there's we'll run those on cars that run maybe 4 teens at the fastest, 420s. Then we go to $2,000 shock that has a bigger canister. But that guy always tells me, oh, I only want to run 420s. My motor's only going to do that. So then he calls me 6 months later and he put another system of nitrous on it, put bigger turbos on it. And he wants to know, well, I really want to go 390s. Okay, well, if you would have told me that up front, we would have started off at $2,000. And
the total spend would have been less overall. Yeah. Well, most guys have a hard time predicting and understanding it. When you work with hundreds of customers and you see them going through like on a conveyor belt, you see it, I see it. That's not the typical experience of the guy in their seat. They don't see, they don't pay attention to 10,000 other guys going through that phase.
Yeah, and I really try to educate people on that as we go. That like if he's right on the edge, are you going to go somewhere and you decide you want to put 2000 sport jet in it and it's going to push us over the edge. It doesn't push you totally over the edge where the car won't go. It makes your window smaller again.
Sure.
Your window gets smaller, and so then you got to spend more money. But the guys like coming up, buy the $1,200 shocks. Then you'll see the need later as you get faster for the $2,000 shocks, double adjustable. Then you'll see the need later for $3,000 shocks, triple adjustables. Then if you're into shocks and into suspension tuning, you'll see the need later for $4,000 or $5,000 shocks. If you go up, there. But we like the guys that spend the buy a set of doubles, and honestly, that guy a lot of times, and that guy is way more appreciative of help than kind of that middle guy.
Another theme that we've seen. So me personally, I get to work with a kind of a broad range of from professionals to some smaller OEMs. To just the blue collar entry level, low budget guys just getting past their first sloppy mechanics build, and they want to build something that goes fast or starts getting on that progression
or lives.
Or lives. And I have so much fun with that crowd. They're number one, they're appreciative. Number two, they're open minded and listening. They haven't gotten jaded or burnt out yet. I just in general, I enjoy the guys at the entry level, and there's a ton more of them too, which helps. But I tend to enjoy that crowd just as much as it's less frustrating to go into a pro stock team who's struggling with their EFI and they're all pissed off at Holly and everybody else.
Yeah.
But anyway, we agree with you. We've heard that theme here before.
And those guys, I'll never stop learning. The day I stop learning is the day I go on the ground. And you'll learn from those guys. When I first started dealing with, Justin and Sean Ellington, that they were the first two people, street racers, that I dealt with. And I learned so much from the environment. It made the NHRA car faster. I was able to make it faster from things I learned on the street and from no preps. Wow. Because again, it's a junk racetrack. So let's just say like Bristol. I was talking about Bristol earlier. Bristol's one of the roughest racetracks.
That's a fun one. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the roughest racetrack.
With the bumps going all the way down the track.
So what we learned in a little town in Bokima, Oklahoma, on the street, there's a big hole. There's a big ski jump. So we worked on some builds and changed some stuff around on those cars. Well, then when I went back to Bristol the next year, we were the first car. We went 570s there 2 years in a row before any other car went 570s.
Wow.
At that racetrack.
That's flying there.
And so I learned from that. But you have to be wide open. And I don't care what level you are at racing or chassis tuning or building components. You can learn stuff from, I'm going to say what you call the lowest guy on the totem pole.
Sure. Just by observation.
Just by observation. And he has an experience that you may have not seen yet. You haven't got there yet. And we all learn and live off of our experiences. And the more you absorb that, the better off you'll be. It's like, we touched a little bit on it before the show about power management. And I tune Bob Ram's nitrous NHRA car. And, we have lots of customers, remember, with turbo cars and now the Pro Charge deal. And people get really stuck on thinking that the way to make your car work is to, leave on 1 pound of boost and ramp in 24 pounds of boost over 6 seconds.
Jesus.
And
we argue about this all the time.
It's amazing how many times that will go up and down the racetrack.
Oh yeah.
But when you have a 41X with 98s on it and it runs 13s in the quarter, then that's the results of that. And so power.
I mean, I just tell
awesome.
people to do that. Try to do it all in boost ramp, and we got friends that got their heads buried in the laptop. And man, boost ramp, that's where it's at. That's all. I was like, no, I don't know, man. Just observing. Again, when I'm low man on the totem pole at some test event like we talked about, I'm watching guys that are going fast that have all the boost in it, and they're probably doing some timing ramp, and they're only doing that. Like they're trying to back out of that as they get the chassis and the rest of it dialed in. They're using that as a temporary crutch, and the whole goal is to get rid of that stuff.
Yep.
But
and so chassis typically, if the car works and the shocks works, for that application, they like power. They want more power. They want more power early. Like with the nitrous car, it's a 908-inch steel. Flows with all the systems on, depending on where you're at, between 5,500 and 6,000 pounds of nitrous. And that is all on in 1.2 seconds.
Yep.
100%, everything you've got. And it's in at 1.2 seconds. And we're looking for the lockup to be 1-to-1.
And this is
thereafter.
Big power stuff too. I mean, some of the small power stuff is 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, but yeah.
And I mean, that's something that,
0.3, baby. 0.3.
That's over 3,000.
Well, when you make 1,050 at the wheel per due, that's
like it ain't 1,050 on nuts. Okay,
I'm teasing.
And so a lot of people they kind of, and they'll create their own problem by not giving a car enough power. Just think about it. If you take any drag car and you decide to idle off the line and roll into the gas and then floor it, what's it going to do? It's going to spin. The chassis never set. The tire never got happy. The tire never got loaded. Weight transfer can't occur because you didn't hit it with a hammer. And so I get guys all the time that we got this much power out of it. We got this much power out of it. And you watch it and, they'll send you a video and it stops the tire when they let off the button. And then you can read, Hoosier or Goodyear, whatever the brand of choice is. You can read that for like 3 revolutions, and then it smokes the tire.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, let's try to blur that by half a revolution.
Right.
Oh,
that's
man,
a good thing that's a good way to tell them that, hey man, put something in it. Oh,
yeah,
I got yelled at for neutering one too hard here recently.
and
But,
and they'll go up and down the racetrack. They're just slow. If they're neutered, they're just slow. And again, a lot of the times the shocks, the chassis, the basic setup, it wants to be beat on. It wants to just be beat on. We were, talking about Orlando earlier. We were at Orlando this last February testing, and we were trying some new gear ratio, lockup stuff in the nitrous car. And with the gear ratio, it was just eating power. It loved power. And so we start changing gear ratios around in it, and I end up leaving 500 RPM higher than I started. And this thing's going, 932 down low, 936, 934, 932. And we started off going 945, 946. That doesn't seem, to a lot of people, that's not like a crazy number. But
that's
in
a
NHRA,
huge gap. That's a huge
NHRA,
difference.
that's number 1 to number 19.
Right.
Right. And just in 60 foot, because that starts, whatever you gain in 60 foot, people always, they'll be like, oh, well, it multiplies. Well, who cares if it multiplies? Let's just say it carries it. Let's just say that whatever you gain in 60 foot, it carries that to the finish line. Well, now you're that much faster. You're 15 thousandths faster.
Exactly.
And 20 thousandths faster, 50 thousandths faster, whatever the number is.
Well, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and people get and sometimes you can get too hung up on 60 foot. The car goes 60 foot, it won't go 61 foot. But it's fast at 60. But the back glass blows out of it at 63.
Right.
So.
Bladders, Scott, bladders. I got to hear.
I know. I got to get on these questions. I've got a couple of them queuing up, so we're going to kind of rapid fire these. But take your time.
I can say that. The example of Bill's car, we fixed some things on his car to make it go faster. The shocks. I coincidentally put up these videos on my camera view just so people could see things. See how stuff reacts if I get a chance to react to something. You're covering so much of it so good. Like I feel like I'm nobody in the world. I know very small amounts of chassis tuning compared to you, and I'm always listening, always learning, but on Bill's car, we had to plant the tire. We started out, I want to say it started off as like a 60 foot, and we ended up in like I don't even remember what it was. Bill, do you remember
130
where we ended up?
130.
Oh, blazing.
Naturally aspirated big block Ford motor in it, and it's ran a 570.
I mean, it's a street-driven car for drag week. They're going to put 10,000 miles on it this year. So there's a lot of compromises. Right. So yeah, they're doing actually pretty good for class.
Never mind the weight of the driver. Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay. That's a good transport, right? Here, that's sort of a segue into my question. Number one, I mean, I see this personally on all sorts of cars. When is it necessary for air bladders under the car when you're transporting it? What's the most affordable way to transport a car if wear is a concern, and at what point is wear a concern for racing shocks? Is it for everybody and half the world are just ignoring it, or what's
100%? There are benefits to putting an airbag underneath the car. 100%. We just had a Hemi Challenge guy that we do a lot of the Hemi Challenge cars, and we had done his shocks last year and freshened everything up, sent them back to him, he puts them on the car. Those guys run like 4 times a year, 5 times a year. They don't run a lot.
Yep.
But he lives in New York, hauled the car to Las Vegas and back. He sends them to me before Indy, and he's like, I just want to get these things freshened up. The bushings in them are so burnt up. The shafts are black. Has nothing to do with going up down the racetrack. Zero whatsoever.
It's all because that car traveled the entire way on its own suspension, just as if it was driven from New York to Vegas and back, right?
Absolutely. So we'll take a shock and put it on the dyno, and let's just say it's a typical rear shock for a car that runs 420s, 450s, whatever, and we can run it on the dyno, and say it's 70 degrees here in the shop. We can put it on the dyno. We have an infrared we put on it that's part of the dyno that data logs it, and I can run this shock for about, say, anywhere from 30 seconds to 1 minute. That thing will be in the high 100s, 180, 190
Wow.
degrees.
Phew.
So now take that same shock and, put it under that for 20 hours and see what happens.
Holy crap.
And it destroys the fluid in them. We use nothing. We use a totally synthetic fluid in all of ours to try to help with that. But a lot of the shock companies use petroleum-based fluids, and we'll get them where, you'll take the shock apart and it'll be caked inside there where, on top of the piston in an area of non-contact where it basically bakes it.
Jeez.
And so 100%, if you run an airbag, they're a couple $100. It's a pain in the butt to deal with sometimes when you're in a hurry and you lost second round, and you just want to get home.
You're pissed off, want to go home. Fucking airbags.
But it will save you rebuilding your shocks. So let's just say, I like everybody to send them in once a year. Typically, they send them in once every 3 years. But it will save you so much money. And then also what it saves you in is how the car works. You put these brand new shocks on, it works great. You haul it
and
around.
It stays
for 3
consistent
months.
working that way. So you're basically, if I'm hearing that right, if you're spending any money on shocks and chassis components, airbags, the sooner you can get into those, the better then.
Absolutely.
Is there any other option?
There's never any downside. An air ride trailer. So an air ride trailer, I'm not going to say that it's as good as, but it's better than a non-air ride trailer. It's a lot easier to buy airbags than it is an air ride trailer. So that's the other way of doing it. But people they'll try to tie their car down really tight just to help it and keep it, slow the motion down. It still goes through the motions, and it still sees the heat.
I was gonna say it still sees the hard initial shocks too, right? Even if it's not a lot of travel, there's a whole lot of force.
And it's the velocity. It's again the velocity, just like earlier. You'll see some NASCAR shocks. Those things will see 400 degrees.
Wow.
So take that same shock and just throw it in the trailer and drive 500 miles.
Right.
See what happens.
Right. Hear you. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's just more reason to have them staying on top of how they're working. That's awesome.
Before we leave that topic, Chris, can you unpack, therefore, what is the correct way to tie a car down in a non-air ride equipped trailer? In other words, you see cars on trailers with, I don't even want to describe some of the crap that I've seen at the events I go to. So
U-Haul trailers.
Yeah. And well, you name it, you see it. So what is the proper way? You're at the point now where you're spending real money on quality shocks so you can get a chassis that works. What should you be doing to tie the car down properly? I know this sounds like, race car 101, but walk around the pits someday or the tech line at Drag Week and you'll see God knows everything.
Yeah.
So what's the right way to do it?
Typically, we'll try to tie the front to the chassis, and for a couple different reasons. One of the main reasons is on a strut is built a lot stiffer at lower velocities, so therefore it will create more heat faster. And so we'll tie the front of the car down, the chassis down, and on the back we'll typically tie the housing down. Always use more straps than you think you need, but with that's where if you put the airbag underneath the back of the car, put it underneath the rear cross member, tie the housing down on the back, and tie the front chassis down, it will alleviate the majority of it will slow it down so that it doesn't see velocities. We're tying the chassis down in the front to try to slow the velocities down of the movement up and down. The rear's not as critical of it as far as the heat that it gains. So then that's where the airbag comes in.
So then, follow-up question. I sense from this that you're saying leave it the heck alone in terms of the shock settings and all of that. Don't try to tighten it up or do something else to make it live through the drive. Leave it alone, tie it down correctly, do all those pieces. Shocks obviously run temperature. You've discussed that. Anything else that needs to be done with the car to make sure that the shocks perform correctly once you've arrived at the racetrack? Or is it focused on everything else?
if it's a pressurized shock, check the gas pressure in it. We're pretty lucky that all of the stuff that we use, I mean, we get top sportsman guys that send the shock back for that 3-year rebuild, and they've never touched a setting, and the gas pressure is still within 5 pounds of what they got shipped out at.
That's cool.
We have it's a Schrader valve, so it can fail. So we get guys. We just had a guy last week, a top sportsman guy, that called me and he's like, "Hey, I have to put air in this thing every run. I have to air the shocks up every run." Okay, we'll send it back. And it was we hadn't originally built them, and the Schrader valve that they used in it was just one that you get at O'Reilly's or Napa. We use a higher end one that's typically for high pressure nitrogen, and so it's a higher temperature, higher pressure one, and the seat in it stays longer. So if you get to the track and you go out there and you make a run and the car behaves totally different, and you didn't check the pressures in it, then you come back and you say, "Wow, it's got 0 pounds in it. We normally have 75." Well, it's probably cavitating. So you're setting it up for cavitation by the air pressure being wrong. So the biggest thing, look for leaks. Get out, get underneath the back of the car. Most people don't like getting under the back of their car. Take the tires off, get under the back, look for leaks, look for around the shaft to be damp. That's just the lubrication getting past the bushing and it's just damp. If there's a puddle, there's an issue. Look at that. Look on the fronts. Check the air pressure in them. Check your settings. Just know where your shocks are set at, and zero them out and put them back to those settings. Count your settings when you zero them out, and just double check all that stuff. It'll save you. What if the setting's off on one of them? You can go out and make 2 runs before you check it again. Well, you just wasted, $200,000, $600,000, whatever.
Very good.
So I apologize, Scott. There's a lot of follow-ups on this.
I know. Bill's like, "Hey, I just want to ask a question about me for my car." No, go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that the implication of a canister shock that runs an overpressure, so means you have to have a nitrogen bottle, and you have to have a setup with which you can fill the shock correctly and measure it accurately. So it's just, I mentioned this because I went through this. It's not that I'm asking a question for my car, but it's an observation. You have to have those other things in order to service and maintain your stuff correctly, which is all part of the bargain. So presumably you guys can sell that as well, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah, we sell nitrogen fill kits. We sell gauges and all that stuff. But I tell people, and when we sell them a nitrogen fill kit, and we get guys that kind of balk on that, and I'm like, do you have a valve spring tester that you test the valve springs on the car? Oh yeah. We got 2 of them. Got a spare in case one goes bad. Okay, well, how's that any different? That's you paid $300 a piece for those, and
right.
So what happens? What happens if a valve spring breaks and you don't catch it? Well, it drops the valve. Okay, so if you don't check the pressure in the shock and you make 10 runs and the car goes nowhere, how much money did that cost you? Sometimes it's hard for people to understand, even rebuilding them on a regular schedule, or the other tools like the gauge and the fill kit. But it's no different than taking extra training fluid with you.
That makes good sense.
So I have one more question, Scott, then I promise I'll shut up for a minute. But Chris, this is the front end of it. So what are the things that you need to know from a prospective purchaser? Because we had a note in our little back channel here about crankshaft center line, meaning should people have actually measured their vertical center of gravity, or is an estimate good enough? Because everybody, the camshaft is roughly where, everybody does that sort of stuff. And 4-wheel weights, cross weights, front and rear. What do people really need to provide in order to get the results that we heard from Norm earlier, where, hey, I put it in right where they're set and it works like magic? What do people need to be prepared in order to buy shocks correctly?
Typically, the more information you can give me, the more I can narrow it down. At minimum, we need weights of the car, front and rear. I like to know power adders, what power adder, how fast you think the car is going to be, or how fast it is, what motor's in it, transmission type, gear ratios. We build a totally different shock for a clutch car non-lockup versus a clutch car lockup versus a non-lockup automatic versus a lockup automatic. That's 4 total different shocks. So So those things are critical. Is it a 4-link car? Is it a lighter bar car? Is it a stock suspension car? What tire do you run? Are you going to run slick or radial? How big? What kind of surfaces do you run on? Those are the things that if people can give me most of those answers, the more of them they can give me, the closer we can get it. But if you just, if it's a guy, he's got a brand new build, have no clue how fast the car's going to run. Man, I bought this motor from some guy on eBay. I don't really know that much about it. And he can tell me, it's a 598 naturally aspirated. I got a turbo 400 I bought from Mark Mickey. I got this converter. We can kind of, we can get him pretty close where he's not going to be off in left field. But let's just say there's 24 clicks in the adjustment. We like starting off at number 12. This guy, he may end up at number 7 or 8. And the problem with that is the less information, the harder it is for us to hit it. So therefore his window's skewed a little bit. We like trying to keep a guy close to the middle just so that as tracks change, environment changes, he can make swings and not be jammed up on one end of an adjustment.
Yeah, he's got adjustability. That's just going to help him out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's actually, so we'll kind of do them out of order here. One of our users asked, or listeners ask, what's the importance and application of crank centerline?
So crank centerline, that's the heaviest, the engine is the heaviest component in your car. So the lower you run the crank centerline, the
You
harder
haven't met me, by the way.
Sorry.
the harder it is to get for the front end to get up and create weight transfer. The higher the crank centerline is, and I'm just throwing out generics here. The higher the crank centerline is, the easier the car wants to wheelie, wants to rotate back. There's a balancing act though. It's easy to just say, hey, I want maximum rotation. Just let's put the crank at 19 inches and call it good. The problem is that weight has to go back forward at some point in time for the car to be fast and the car to be happy. And so it's a balancing act. But there's times that we'll go out, we'll go somewhere, and I'm going to kind of push this back to on a racetrack because it's a little more controlled environment, but you can apply the same thing to anywhere. But we'll go out at night and the track's 85 degrees, sun's down, nice and tight. Wade prepped it, so it's awesome. And we'll put the crank center line down just because the car wants to wheelie because it has so much traction. So then we go out during the day and the track's 138 degrees and it's slimy and greasy and built up. And so then we have to raise the crank center line because you don't have enough traction under the tire to start that rotation that we talked about earlier. So you raise the crank center line, it's easier for the weight to move, the center of gravity to push itself to the rear of the car and apply weight to the rear tires and apply traction.
So I don't think most of our users are moving their engine up and down to move their crank center line. I don't think it's something that any of them are going to, there may be a couple of them somewhere, but most of them are not going to have that luxury. Most of our guys are not at that dollar level.
Well, but Scott, a lot of them are building their second or third car and they're figuring out that's a variable that they can at least play with early on in the build.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying that the majority of our guys aren't. So what do they need to think about on that crank center line for guys who aren't going to be adjusting that every race?
And for the guys that are building cars, it's a low dollar variable to change at the time of build.
Yes, it's a lot more expensive to do it afterwards. But when I'm talking about changing the crank center line, I'm talking about going to the front struts and cranking them up a quarter of an inch and raising the crank center line a quarter of an inch, dropping it a quarter of an inch. I'm not talking about physically moving the motor. These are all things that, based on your combination, and again, it comes from experience, kind of where to put a crank center line in a build to know the window that you're going to work in. But those things still all apply. You can go at any point in time and, if the car won't get the front end up, you can crank the struts up or the coilovers on it, and it will try to get the front end up better. That adds bite to the rear of the car. And that's something that some of your listeners may not be there yet, but they're going that direction. We're all trying to get faster. And so they may go, hey, wait, I heard that. Let me try that. And then they try it and they see some benefit from it. It's a tool that's in the box, but it's not used typically at the lower levels as much as it could be.
Very nice. Next up, how do you start? This is my own personal question. Where did we start with data gathering for the tuning, all the different things we're talking about here tonight? Video, I mean, we've heard guys say video cameras under the car, video cameras of the rear tire. What, do we need to have shock travel sensors, which, by the way, they're not that expensive anymore?
You mean like
and
my video right now?
What about the importance of an accelerometer? Just your thoughts on that, gathering data.
So you can never have too much data. You can not use it, and you can always refer back to it later. But you can never have too much data. Shock travel sensors, I tell guys, okay, they have gotten very reasonable. It used to be $1,000 a corner. Now I think it's a couple $100 a corner. There's some guys out there. But if you're going to do shock travel sensor, will tell you more about what the suspension is doing than anything you can videotape or watch, because it's hard to see what the separation is when the sidewall disappears. Wraps a slick up. Well, did it extend and then compress, or did it just extend? You can see all that with shock travel. I tell people, if budget allows, buy the right rear first, then buy the left front, then add the other two corners as budget allows. We'll see the first thing we'll see is the right rear. And then the next one that we look at when we go through data is the left front. Those two will pretty well tell the picture of when the front end gets up and what the back of the car does.
So do you automatically make a math channel to look at, or however you have to do it with your system? As we found out, like, there are some out there whose log viewers math channels are so poor, they can't do things over time. Do you want to see velocity right off the bat?
I like looking at velocity. I'm going to call it a shock builder's function. And so most people will not get that much out of velocity, because to get something out of the velocity, they have to understand that dyno sheet and see the velocities on the dyno sheet. So, but anytime you set one up, if you set up a math channel to show velocities, when you call me and say, hey, it's doing this, this, and this here, if you can give me velocities, it's easier for me to narrow it down than if we don't have velocities. The other thing in the car, there's one sensor in the car that never lies, and it is if you had one sensor only in a car, it's the one sensor, and it's the G meter. The G meter will not lie to you.
Thank you.
Yep, the G meter is awesome.
If you take a run where your car went out there and it went 6 flat, and you average the G meter from the start line to the finish line, and then you have a run where your car went 550 and you average the G meter from the starting line to the finish line, I promise you the 550 will have a higher average than the 6 will.
Yep.
And
very simple.
So higher average G, higher overall G, but average G more than anything. It's really easy to throw the front end up and see a high G spike. And then it drops the front end and the G meter goes down, or power doesn't allow.
Or tells you where to shift,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Helps you do all kinds of stuff.
Us with like the big nitrous motor, we still turn that thing over 8,000 RPM. But man, we'll put a manifold on it and we'll see, man, this thing will not, G meter nosedives at 7,800. And so then we change manifolds, and then we're like, oh wow, we can turn this thing 8,000, 8,200, whatever. It will show you all of that. Its average will show you how fast the car is, or you'll see spots. Why does it go out here? The G meter's 3.2, then it drops down to 2.6, and then it goes to 3.5. Well, maybe it's your tune-up. Maybe you got this thing just lean early, and people think lean or fast, but lean makes no power. It has it takes fuel to make BTUs to make power. And we'll see people that do that, and then they'll start turning nitro systems on or throw boost at it, and it will make a bigger move than what you made. But it's because the map, you change the fuel map there too.
Right.
And the G meter will show you that. The G meter will not lie. And so I tell everybody, if you break everything on the race pack, just give, I just need the G meter. And you can get most of the rest out of it.
If a person doesn't have the ability to create a math channel. You can very easily export your data from almost every data logger out there.
Scott, we're going to go ahead. We're going to do a webinar on that, man. I'll walk through that later.
Well, I just wanted to give them a general overview. They can just put the data into Excel, and they can do a cell 1 minus cell 10 before it, and they can get an idea of where it's moving.
Yep, you can get velocity. We're going to do in the next week or two.
Open Office or whatever the version you have,
Right. We're going to do a webinar on how to do that for the Holly guys, because I didn't realize that was such a thing, and people were going out there and buying $500 worth of boxes to give you velocity values or whatever they're charging for that stuff, when you can do that with just 2 steps and a free spreadsheet program. So I was going to do maybe an hour webinar on that, on walking them through downloading, LibreOffice or something for free. But anyway, so good stuff. Does that segue into any other questions? Man, there's some good questions out there still on the I think I'm going to ask the Charlie Hill question if we got.
Yeah, I was say Charlie Hill had a solid question, and something about weight. Who is the guy? Weight biases and what'll work and what won't work. And
well, that was Jack Wayne. Of course, he's asking, will my pickup truck ever hook up right on crappy surfaces? But, no. But here, let's ask this one. This is one for Chris. What's your opinion about a small tire radial car that likes to be 50-50 weight bias and has to have the front shocks all the way loose to even move on the starting line? It's a stock frame C5, I'm assuming he means Corvette, with a 4-link and a solid axle, 4-corner double adjustable shocks, good brand, canisters on the rear. What he wants to know what you would how you would approach that problem.
Typically it's a leverage thing. And, he said it's a 4-link car, so typically the thing, to make the radial work, it's going to want to extend instantly. It has to smash the tire. So he's at 50-50 on the weight. So, typically you're going to have to take that thing, you're going to have to shorten the bar way up or get it up real high on the intersect. You have to smash the tire. It's just like starting the rotation that we talked about earlier. If it doesn't have the initial traction, and the only way to give it initial traction is to feed it separation instantly, it's to smash the tire.
Very good. Perduto?
I was looking, there's a Delgado out here talking about how he's going to do it with his project firmware and giving you the winky face because he's got to shove that in your face when he can.
I had a follow-up question for Chris on that same question that came from Charlie Hill, because he said something else. He said you have to have the front shocks all the way loose to move, get it to move off the starting line. Doesn't that imply that the shocks or front struts or whatever in this case, and I guess it's shocks because it's C5, are not valved properly?
Yes and no. If it doesn't have leverage, the shock doesn't, there's nothing to extend that shock. And so you have to soften the thing up. And on the other hand, they could be way too stiff. But typically, if it's a good brand and or somebody's built them that's reputable, they can hit it close enough that it sounds more like it's a leverage thing. If this thing is spinning first turn of the tire first.
He's adding information right now. He says when I add separation, it loses traction 40 to 50 foot out. It likes about 1 inch separation total. Yeah, you got something way wrong in the back of the car, brother.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not hitting the tire hard enough in the back.
Yes, it sounds like it's not hitting the tire hard, not enough power out the gate.
He's getting separation.
Hitting the tire really hard there,
Yeah.
But he's getting separation, but you have to keep that levered. You have to, you have to make the car grunt. And if you don't, it will not stay hooked. We have some really fast guys on radials, and one thing lately is you look at a lot of the pictures and currently like in Radial versus the World, there's a lot of pro mod cars that they put little tires on, and they look like they extend like 14 inches.
Yeah.
Because especially like, a new Corvette that has a big enough wheel well that you can take a 36-inch tire off of it without taking air out of it. Now you put a 315 on it, and this thing, when it's setting still, looks like it's extended a foot. But we have, Mark Mickey's a good customer of ours, and he's, probably one of the fastest guys on 275s right now that there is, and, was one of the fastest guys on Radial versus the World until his car kind of isn't the thing now. But,
right.
we don't extend that car crazy numbers. We don't, it's more about control than it is, shoving it out 5 or 6 inches. It's about control. It's making the car work for it, making it grunt to lever that apart. Make it struggle, because as long as it's not really easy to throw it apart, then it has to work for it, and it plants that into the tire. If it shoves it apart real easy, then the weight goes forward in the car.
Mike Head has a good one here, if there's no other follow-ups to that.
Another thing on that, like real quick before we get off of it, is front end travel too. I don't know how much travel they have in the front end of this C5. It's going to depend on what shock's on it. But especially like on the radial deal, we started back with Mark. Probably it's been close to 5 years ago now, at least 4, that we started adding front end travel to the car. We had a strut on the car that was like a 3-inch travel deal. Then we went to a 4-inch and a 4.5-inch travel to give it more outbound. That has become really big, and even back to the street stuff and the no prep stuff, we've added travel, outbound travel to these cars. We can control it with stiffer valving, but when the car sees a stop, so let's just say that the front end's in the air and it extends and it tops the shock out. It's the same as taking a dead blow hammer and smacking the back of the car up. You shove that weight forward. And so it takes bite away from the car. So that may be something too that he's seeing, out at like 40, 50 feet. Did the shock top out and the front end was in the air? And then it takes bite off the back of the car. That's where sometimes, more travel will help. We've developed some new stuff lately for more for the Pro Mod cars, the strut cars. But we have a conversion for a lamb strut that takes a 3-inch stroke strut, and in the same body configuration makes it a 5-inch, up to 5 inches.
Oh yeah.
We did one for the Strange Ultra strut with the Penske body on it. That that thing's available in a 3.5 and a 4-inch stroke. We just finished up development on one to make that up to 6-inch stroke with the same installed height. So adding 2.5 inches of outbound travel. Now we control that with valving so it doesn't top out, but it helps the car rotate. And that maybe is part of what he's seeing in that C5 too.
That makes good sense. Next question. Mike Head asks, and he's a I don't think he's an Ozark Mountain super shifter, but he's definitely a manual trans slipper clutch guy. He's asking, I'm with you on this. We like Mike too. He's a friend of ours from Engine Masters Challenge. We did Dahlquist is one of our hosts. He's not on here tonight, but he built the best finishing ever Pontiac at the old Engine Masters Challenge contest, which Mike Head was on our crew. Anyway, Mike says, can you explain the difference? And I'm going to say maybe your approach between slipper clutch and lockup clutch shock setups.
So it all, again, is velocities and how hard it hits the clutch. So back when I've always been a clutch guy, I started in the clutch world, and it was very hard for me, and it was actually very entertaining for people like Mark Mickey when I switched an automatic, because I said I would never do it. But so we'll see typically anything that's a lockup, be it a clutch or an automatic that's a lockup, it's going to be more aggressive. At some point, it's going to be more aggressive. So a shock on, let's just pick a totally a clutch lockup, non-lockup. The amount of violence that it sees, which violence is turned into velocities, is less with a slipper clutch. It's a softer application over a longer period of time, and it will actually see less velocities. It may initially see a 20-inch move and then transition into maintain a 2-inch per second move. A lockup will typically see the same initial move because you're running about the same amount of clutch, but as you apply the lockup, the velocities will typically try to go up because you're applying more power at an earlier point in the racetrack. So you may see the velocities move up to, say the other car was 2 to 3 inches. You'll see the velocities go from 5 to 6 inches per second. So how we build the curve, I should have printed off a dyno sheet and sent it to you or show it to you what I'm talking about in this curve. But how we, the dyno sheet on the left-hand side starts at 0 inches per second. As you move to the right, it goes to 10 or 20, however we print it. And then vertically are the forces. So how we create the curve, force over velocity, we may make for a lockup type, we'll make that more aggressive. We'll have a higher force at a lower velocity than we will a non-lockup. Sorry if that was too much
No, you're good. There was actually a question I wanted to ask. I gotta go back and find it real quick. Hang on 1 second. Oh, how does rear suspension affect wheelies?
So multiple things. A car that sometimes if a car compresses too much, it's easy to keep the front end up. Especially let's just take a 4-link car because it's the easiest thing to discuss and to kind of give an analogy on this. So you have your intersect set up. The lower the intersect is, the more it wants to scoop underneath the car. As you compress the back of a car, the intersect goes down. So if you have a car setting at ride height and you have let's just say you have a 22-inch 4-link bar and you have a 66-inch long intersect. So it's 3 times the length of the 4-link bar. If you compress the back of the car 1 inch, it moves the intersect down 3 times that.
Yep.
So that will drive a car sometimes into wheeling more. Something that we try to do to alleviate that is we try to let the car back up some. So we'll compress the car initially, let it extend back, and I'm talking about on slicks here. Extend back some. As it extends, it will try to push the front end back down. But another thing, like talking about Larry's car earlier, a lot of people try to control wheelies totally with the back of the car. The front car and where the travel is and where the strut is and where the valving is as important or more important than the back of the car is. We've seen this a lot. We've got you brought up a pickup deal earlier. We've got a really good customer down in southern Missouri. The truck's called, it's an S10, it's called Red Savage. His name's Justin Heckman. And when they originally came to me, they were having
Justin.
Crazy wheelie issues. Yeah. Crazy wheelie issues with that thing. And so my cousin, Nate Bell at Freedom Fab Works, he worked with Justin on the truck and we took the shocks off of it, front and rear, put shocks on the thing, and this thing become an animal. Front end's 6 inches in the air now, and it was more the fronts than it was the rears that did it. So one is just as important as the other one. Don't always just look at the back for wheelie issues.
Very cool. Good answer. That was enlightening. What next, Perduto? Anyone else got any other ones?
I'm looking.
What do we got on YouTube?
While Mike is looking, there's a question that was generally sort of introduced on the Facebook feed by Chris Delgado, which is talking about shocks that can be electronically adjusted during the run.
CO2 adjusted.
Yeah, well, there was CO2 adjusted. There's electronically adjusted.
Yep.
The Pro Stock guys. Can you touch on that a little bit, Chris? I know that's getting into the deep end of the pool. Can you touch on that? When we start getting into the $20,000 a pair of shocks and what people are able to do with that. It's always fun to talk about the SF stuff as in science fiction.
So the original shock that could be what we called shifted was a Coney Electric.
Just air beat positions on that one, right?
Yeah. So it has 4 total positions. You originally in the original box, you had to start at one position. You shifted it to the second position by a button. Then we got smarter and decided to rig a timer up on it, and we let it shift by time. And so what it does is, we talked earlier about high speed and low speed and opening up a needle, opening up the needle and seat. And that's what's called a bleed. So what happens is the more you open that needle and seat, the harder it is to open the shim stack, but it will flow more fluid through the needle and seat. So the Coney Electrics opened a bleed hole. They exposed a hole in the piston that just allowed more fluid to go through it. So Don Ness, back to Don earlier, Don actually come up with a way to take that Coney Electric shock, he made it where it could sweep through 4 settings instead of just 2, made a box for it. And then he also put air on the bottom of the shock. And at a later time, if we ever want to do another one of these, we can kind of prepare, and I can demonstrate.
Oh, yeah.
I can show
For
you some of this
sure.
stuff. But,
For sure.
so Don made an
100%.
adjuster on a Coney. You put a flat screwdriver in it, and you've got 7 positions that you can adjust it into. Well, Don made a little device that went on there in an air cylinder, and it could sweep through those 7 positions. Then he made it where it would sweep through it 2 times. So what it did was, as the car goes down the track, it doesn't require as much resistance in the shock, because the power to the ground is diminishing only because the car's going faster. It does the same amount of power, but the velocities the velocities from leverage go down. The only velocities you will see is like when a car goes over a bump. So we would open that bleed up so it would free flow fluid easier to allow the car to go over the bump better and settle. It's not how a car hits the bump, because that's a known in the racetrack. It's how it recovers on the backside of it. So if the shock's too stiff, it bounces the tire. So this would allow the shock to follow the road better. That's how it all started. Then we got into Don again in about 2007, invented for a Penske shock what's called an air slide. So it had a ramp in the top. We could adjust it infinitely. Same on the bottom on the compression side. So it would travel. The piston traveled about 1.5 inches. You could adjust those stops. You could change pressures. We put springs on them, flow controls to change how fast it would move. So we could sweep it through bad spots on the track and then stiffen it back up if we needed to, like for a gear change. And so then basically everything since then has become air actuated. We have air that makes them stiffer when they go down the track, softer when they go down the track. The $20,000 shocks, there's a little clutch in there that we actually lock up like on the starting line and then release it as the car goes down the track. We also have devices if we want to change the ride height of the car going down the track, like for aero. We have a spring seat that has air in it. We leave the starting line with 300 pounds of air in the spring seat, which locks it extended. As the car goes down the track, we want to get the body down because the tire has grown. So as the tire grows, we want to lower the wing to get the body out of the air. So we start bleeding air off of this spring seat and change the ride height at the back of the car by 2 inches using that. And it gets the wing back down to a 0 degree angle. The quarter panels are down lower because the tire has grown 2 inches. And so it shoved it up. We just lowered it back down.
So you're doing active aero. Interesting.
Absolutely. I did a deal. I can say it now, but back in NHRA and early IHRA days, we used to, before we come up with a bunch of this stuff, I actually made spring-loaded wings on some of the cars so as the back of the car would go up, if the car raised 2 inches from tire growth, it raised the wing 2 inches, and it might raise the wing a degree and a half, a lot of drag. So we actually made slotted spring-loaded rods with a detent so that as it pushed on it would compress the wing on the car. It got deemed illegal by IHRA, and then we couldn't run it anymore. But it was a really cool concept because then when the car stopped, the wing extended back to where it normally was.
So for those of you who think that active aero in drag racing doesn't matter because drag doesn't matter in drag racing, yeah, think again.
I even know some street and no prep guys that are having good luck with playing around with attack angles.
Yeah, I mean,
try flying a toaster versus flying an aerodynamic car, and you'll find out real quick that little tiny bit makes a huge difference at 200 miles an hour.
It can.
And and like talking about no prep guys, like say wing on the back of the car, which creates downforce. The more wing area you have, and I'm talking about general area, even the spill plates can create or diminish downforce, the length and height of them. But if you've got a car that's going like on the no prep deal, we'll get out there and the first 200 feet's pretty good, and then after that you're on a dirt road. So you want to create downforce, and those guys are going 150, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. We're going 170, 60, 70 on the street. So the only way to create that is with wing, and changing angle of the wing as the car goes down the road, is something else to look at. Just like we tried to diminish it, you can add wing to it. There is a point that too much wing becomes detrimental. Once you have a well-working car and they compress over about 2.5 inches due to wing, it typically starts trying to pick the front of the car up, takes weight off the front of the car. So the aero doesn't, and if you put enough aero in the front of the car to keep the front of the car down, it just creates too much drag.
Perdido, anyone else? See any other questions?
A lot of, if I retain 75% of this, I'm way ahead. Great show, best show ever. A lot of that.
I created a poll on Facebook, and so far it's 100% and rating it a top 5 episode. So that's
cool. And I appreciate all the listeners. I love.
Well, there's a lot of them.
I love educating people in my experiences. I've had a lot of experiences, and I like sharing that with people because typically the way I learned it is through experiences and other people sharing with me. Throughout my career, I've been very fortunate to have people like, let's say Don Ness and to share his experiences that might have taken me 10 years to get. And so I'm happy to share that stuff. And a lot of these guys, maybe only 25% of this information applies to them, but 2 years from now, the next car they get, 50% of it applies. The next one, 75% applies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we learn by doing, but that's really helpful, man. We appreciate that, Chris. This turned out to be really good. So I think there was one other question. How would you approach, I think it's the last one, but how would you approach when a guy says, hey, I've got an IRS stick car, pretty much the worst of everything.
Where
do those guys start?
Man, we've been fortunate to work with some IRS guys, and I have an IRS car. I have an IRS stick car myself.
Oh wow!
That's I have a 14 Camaro twin turbo car, and I'm a hardcore clutch guy, so it has to have a stick in it. And so I've worked with it a lot. We worked with some guys here in Missouri, Chad Barton and CBI Street Cars. We've worked with Chad a lot on vet suspension and Camaros. The IRS stuff is so critical of shocks. People do not even remotely understand. We have tried every type of shock. I mean, as far as even dealing with the, non-pressurized shock, pressurized shocks, they respond so well to a pressurized shock, very, very specific valving. And even as much as, let's just pick a Camaro. Does it have stock lower arms on it? Does it have BMR lower arms that will fit a 17-inch wheel? Does it have a 15-inch conversion? That's 3 total different shocks for those cars. They are very, very critical of front and rears. And we've been fortunate to work with some really good people and create some really nice packages for IRS stuff. We had actually 2 guys today, and we sell typically IRS stuff. It's not uncommon to sell 3 or 4 sets a week, all 4 corners. And we started off kind of with a guy named Shane Hines that tunes cars in St. Louis here. He had a CTSV wagon. So we basically started with the hardest car to deal with.
Right.
A 4,900 pound CTSV wagon that ended up going 921 at 4,900 pounds.
Yep. We know Shane pretty well. He's one of the more popular OEM ECU tuners out there.
Yeah.
Get him on here sometime. He's shy.
Yeah, Shane's a real good friend of mine, and he tuned my Camaro for me, and he's a cool guy.
Yep, that's good stuff.
Bill, you heard that? He said Camaro, not Mustang. I just wanted you to make sure you heard that.
Yeah.
My disappointment, I'm raining tears, but what can I say? Chris, what is the best way for RealTuners podcast listeners to engage with Kinetic Engineering? What's your preferred mode of communication? How would you like to hear from them? How best do you think you can help these guys out?
And our Kinetic Facebook page, they can contact me through there. There's a phone number on there that's for the shop, but they can also text me on that number. Sometimes people get frustrated that they call me at 11 o'clock in the morning and I haven't called them back by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's because we're working, and I typically, like phone calls, if it requires a phone call, I try to make those later after UPS is boxed up and gone, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. But, if they send us a message on our Kinetic Engineering Facebook page, or even text us on that number that's on there, that's the best, most guaranteed way to get typically a faster response. Now, don't get shocked if you text me at 6 o'clock at night something and I text you back at 3 o'clock in the morning, because I'm probably still here at the shop. That's the beauty of a text. You don't have to read it till 9 o'clock when you get up,
That's right.
And so we can answer a lot of that stuff, through Messenger or through text at hours that I'm going to say works better for us. Just because it's jammed here all day, and, the phone's ringing all day, and inadvertently it's the guy calling that we're working on his stuff. And every minute I talk to him, 10 minutes I don't get to work on his stuff because I got to get back to where I was on it. So Facebook, the Facebook page and text on that is the easiest. Call us if you need to call us. And, if you don't hear back from me till the next day, just don't get too worked up over it.
Awesome. Do you have an online form or questionnaire that people can fill out to give you the details on their combinations so that you can be a step ahead on that process?
I like being a little more personal on that, so the guy will, most of the time, especially like on Messenger, they'll send me the basis of their car when they start. They'll say, hey man, I've got a 05 Corvette twin turbo deal. It's got a 2-speed in it, but I drive it every day, and I need stuff. Well, I'm going to ask that guy different questions than the guy that calls, gets on there and says, hey, I've got I just picked up this car at Proline. That's a turnkey car. So I try to tailor it a little more to the person, some information I need that would be on a form and some I wouldn't for that guy. So I try to keep it a little more personal than just fill out a form and send it to me. I feel like a lot of times when I fill out a form and send it, it's lost a personal touch,
Cool. Mr. Clark.
Anyone else? That's the last of the questions I got, although we have a shitload of listeners still hanging on. That was a good show tonight, and we didn't even have audio glitches. But let's see. Yeah, everybody's saying thank you.
I drank anyway.
83% of our listeners rate this a top 5 show, which is that's saying a lot, man, because this is episode 134. We've been doing this over 3 years, and it's about to average like an hour and 3/4 per show. So there's almost we're up on 300 hours of content. So that's we really appreciate it. If you ever wanted to come back with a specific topic and wanted to have you can share your screen if you use a computer. You can put things up, and we've had Shannon Davis get on here and did some pretty good how to use his product demonstrations with screenshots and things like that. So if you ever wanted to come back and got bored, let us know.
Or, if you want to do like a live shock dyno, we'd love to see that.
Oh God, something like that'd be cool.
That's, let's just, we'll talk about timing and stuff doing it, but I would like to do one maybe where we dyno a shock and then, I change 3 clicks and we dyno it again.
Yeah.
And watch it. You just watch what happens. And not that it will educate people on, it will educate them on like a dyno sheet, but not as much as that is, it's really cool to see what you have actually, how it functions. And you understand that, 1 click doesn't do it. It takes 3 to make the move you're wanting. You'll get a better idea of it. And then we can also look at like some of the air stuff and I can just kind of show you a little bit more. Maybe we'll take a shock apart, just have it apart laying there to show you some of the internal parts and stuff like that. And do a little more, I want to call it live or hands-on my end.
Yeah. Yeah. We do a lot of live training classes and webinars and things too. We definitely arrange that.
And, maybe it's something that, if you want to throw up on your site or whatever, hey, we're going to do maybe something a little more hardcore on shocks. What do you guys want to see? You want to see how to adjust it. You want to see how to fill it with air. Do you want to, and then maybe we'll focus on some of that stuff. Be happy.
I like that idea. That's cool.
Yeah.
Bill, further thoughts? Want to take us out?
I lost him.
Bill is muted.
Oh, I was
Bill
trying
muted
to
himself.
successfully unmute. Chris. Yeah, okay. Anyway, this was awesome. Thank you. You may have been able to see, not our audience couldn't all see the videos running in the background that Scott Evans was kind enough to share. That was my slow ass Fox body being shown there. But in any event, this has been great for that subsequent show. That idea of what the hell happened? Oh, there he is. Okay.
Sorry, I lost you there.
That idea of some live shock dyno tuning and then sort of at the track shock tuning 101. Scott Evans has been a great resource for that on this show, as have Mike Perduto and some of the others. But having your kind of expertise to walk people through what you do and how you do it and how you assess where my problems are and how I address them, that would be a great follow-up show. And we just can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on here tonight and share all this expertise. So thank you very much. And Mr. Clark, I think we'll
take him out. And once again, thank you, Chris Bell from Kinetic Engineering. Any other things you got to say before we let you go, boss?
Anytime you guys want to do this, just get a hold of me, and I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Thank you for being approachable, man. We very much appreciate that. Thousands and thousands of people are going to be listening to this in the next 48 hours.
Dude,
podcast.
You did an amazing job of making things understandable, which is hard to find.
I'm a fucking EFI nerd, and I was getting most of what he was saying. And it's kind of now I kind of want to go out and try and play with some of this stuff.
You get yourself in trouble. Watch out.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. All right. Everyone take care. Stick around if you want to. We can bullshit for a few minutes afterwards. But thanks everybody else for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. And we'll be back next week with something. Remember, we need to do a webinar on how to get shock velocity out of your Holley ECUs for free. So anyway, we'll talk about that in the next week. Thanks everybody. Take care.
I don't hear you anymore. Is the music playing?
It's playing.
Okay.